And our specialty is to, well, first optimize instruments and then customize them. That means when you usually get an instrument, you pick it out of a bunch of instruments, and that's what I want to talk about today. What is a smart way of doing it, and what you really should look for. And so we have, over the years, hopefully learned a lot about it and developed techniques so that we can guarantee that the instrument is in a better shape when you try it, and finally adjust it to your individual needs. So at one point, well, we all started to play an instrument, and we most likely were kids and got an instrument from the school or something which definitely wasn't maybe of top class, but we learned somehow to figure out how this instrument works and made our first steps on it. Now we have a certain level where we can see that whatever we have provides a certain kind of, playing ability, but we have more needs and more wishes. And often the conclusion is that, let's just get a new instrument. First of all, this is not always really necessary. Only in very few occasions it really makes sense to, change to a different instrument. And, the marketing departments of the different companies, they come with all different kind of arguments why this one is maybe better than something else. And the idea with this lecture is to give you some solid knowledge how to, judge instruments, to see which parts of the instrument have what kind of influence, where are the limits, where are the possibilities, and what is a question regarding the problems I have concerning the instrument, or maybe things which have something to do with my disabilities. So first of all, as a woodwind player, the only thing what you do is you play with air. You blow air into an instrument. And so it makes sense to understand how does this whole thing works. There's a very nice analogy where we always can refer to it because it's our voice. When we speak or sing, we inhale air, have it in our lungs, and then when we exhale, it will pass our vocal cords. And we can either just have the air blown out and nothing will happen, or we can tighten our vocal cords. The distance becomes smaller, and when air passes by, there's a suction which causes the vocal cords to close. As soon as they close, air can't pass any longer, and then the suction disappears and it opens up again. This is just the vibration that we need so that the vocal cords can really work properly. It's exactly the same what happens on a reed. So you have the air in your body and you blow it through the mouthpiece. If you don't do anything with your embouchure, you will just get, it's kind of a windy noise, but not really a tone. And that's why we have to reduce the distance of the reed to the mouthpiece so that the suction we will have as soon as air passes by will be enough that it can close the reed towards the mouthpiece completely. Then the suction stops, the reed will flip back. It's exactly the same system. And this is the tone producer. And we as instrument makers, we work from this point on, and you work on the other side. So you have to learn how to manipulate and to control the air from your side, and I can help you to understand what is possible to control and what options there are on the other side. So as soon as the air passes the vocal cords, it comes into a voice chamber. This is our mouth. And it's a fantastic organ because we, with our lips, with our cheeks, with our tongue and teeth position, we have possibilities to change quite a few parameters. So depending how we have the tongue position, we will have a different voice. Depending on how we open our mouth, we will have a different sound. And that makes us so amazing that we can really communicate and can change our voice constantly. This option we don't have on an instrument. So as soon as you have made one decision for a certain instrument, the basic sound is defined. And that's really the thing what you need to know. And that's the one what you have to find. You have to find the instrument with the correct sound for you. Anything else can be altered. And when we look at clarinets, well, we have a body with a long hole. The long hole equals the so-called bore, equals our mouth chamber and lip. So depending how this hole is created and dimensions, we will have different kind of sounds. If we look at all the different kind of clarinets on the market, you will have some instruments with a smaller bore, some with a middle-sized bore and wide bore. And that will have a huge impact on the way how the instrument reacts, how it tunes, how it voices. Beginner instruments are usually always wide-bored, because when you have a wider bore, bigger opening, the air goes through much easier. It's the same like when you open your mouth very wide and you just, get your vocal cords to vibrate, and your producer, it's a very bright sound. If you would close the bore, you get a darker sound, or it's exactly the same what happens on the instrument. So as more we close the bore, as darker the tone will be. Student instruments are, like I said, traditionally provided with a large bore because it makes it easier for the students to play. Two other things which are typical with student instruments is that, they try always to keep the cost as low as possible. So they make also the instruments kind of, I wouldn't say primitive, but simple. And the tone holes on these instruments usually don't have any kind of undercutting. It's really just a straight hole. The more advanced instruments, they have also more advanced bore. And one thing which is very typical is that these instruments will have a smaller main bore. When we look at clarinets, in literature it's often referred to as an instrument with a cylindrical bore. This is not true anymore. Traditional, as a very old instrument, they had it. Hammerschmidt instruments still offer it, but all other instruments, they have first a reversed conic bore. That means around the barrel, it's around 15 millimeters, and then it goes down to the G-hole. From the G-hole down to the bottom G-hole, most clarinets are completely cylindrical, and this is the area which I always refer to when I say it's a small, mid-size, or a large bore. And from that G-hole on, most clarinets then just flare out. The difference between these instruments is then, first of all, how narrow can a bore be? And how do I come from the wider entrance of my barrel to this narrow spot at the G-hole? There are basically two ways. One is a straight line, just a tapered bore, and the other one is a so-called polycylindrical one. That means you have a straight bore and a little step, another straight bore, a little step, and so on. From the bottom G-hole, most clarinets have just a parabolic flare out. Now, when what does it mean, or what kind of effect does it have when we have a smaller bore? Like I said, the instrument will have a darker tone. The other thing is it will have more resistance. The tone is warm and dark, the instrument has more resistance. And when we have instruments with a larger bore, the resistance will diminish and the tone becomes brighter. This as such is not a good or bad quality, it's just a different color. There's one other thing which is very important for clarinet players to know. The instrument you start with will change over time, especially the instruments with a small bore. The smaller bores will over time increase, and we often use the term where we say an instrument is blown out. This is actually not the case. It's not because you played on the instrument. What happens is, over the years, you will have swapped your instrument many, many times. And it's really the swap which wears out the instrument. We can just take an instrument, we don't have to play on it. If I measure on certain spots the dimension of the bore, I can tell you right on, you have an instrument which has this and this kind of acoustical properties. And it fits always. Now when you play this instrument, you have a new instrument, played it for a while, and you liked it. And it changes very, very slowly. It takes years. Usually you can first notice after about 5, 6 years professional playing and professional swapping that you certainly have problems with your intonation. Your instrument is becoming sharp. Another thing is that it plays more and more open. So the first thing you usually do is you look for an instrument with, you look for a longer barrel to get the intonation better in tune. The next thing is that while the longer barrel will help you with your left-hand notes better, more than with your right-hand notes. Now you found something where the intonation is acceptable, but still you, compared with a new instrument, you think that your instrument is very open. And you will shop for a different kind of mouthpieces. And you always end up with a mouthpiece which has a smaller opening. Because what happened is the original resistance what you had, which also gave you the control, disappears. And you try to gain it now by using a mouthpiece with a smaller opening and harder reeds. The result you finally get is absolutely acceptable and legitimate. There's nothing wrong in doing it. It's just important that you are aware of this kind of correlation. Because at one point you will notice that, well, this process continues and continues, and as wider the bore gets, as harder it is to find really mouthpieces which will compensate for this kind of problem. And as harder it is to find one, as more you will believe as soon as you found the right mouthpiece, this is just an amazing mouthpiece. And at one point when you look for another instrument, you of course will use your mouthpiece, which is also the right thing to do. Start always with a mouthpiece what you have, because you know that your reeds work. But be aware that this mouthpiece will result in certain kind of preferences which are maybe not the perfect final ones. So when you use your mouthpiece and try different instruments, a scenario what we see almost every day is that people put a tuner on the table, then they play different instruments, and they play scales up and down. Well, why do you do that? Because you want an instrument which is better in tune than the one you have. And then we should have a little look about the phenomenon of intonation. I can ask a piano tuner, tune this piano, and I don't have to be here. If he does a good job and I come back, I play it, everything will be in tune. It doesn't matter whether or not I hit the keys or anyone else hits a key. If he did a good job, it will be in tune. This is not the case with any woodwind instrument. Anyone who claims that he makes an instrument perfectly in tune either lies or have no clue what he's talking about. Because there's too many other components in it which have a huge impact. Your mouthpiece, the way how you play, your embouchure, your airspeed, and so on. We all know these parameters, and there's as such nothing right or wrong. The only thing which counts is really what is your preferred way and what kind of sound do you want to achieve. As soon as I know that, then I can, as an instrument maker with the right knowledge, adjust the instrument to your needs. A very common scenario is that you have a very good jazz player who usually plays with a rather loose embouchure and a very big open mouthpiece and very soft reeds. He will use very short barrels. And classical trained player, he will use a completely different setup with a much smaller opening, much harder reeds, much higher airspeed. And both of them are excellent musicians. So which one makes a better choice? This is just the wrong question. So when you look for instruments, what you should find, like I said in the beginning, is the right sound. How do we do that? Well, you take the mouthpiece and reed you have, because you know that, and then you try different instruments. It doesn't matter if you have 1 or 100. You always compare just 2 instruments next to each other. And don't play a scale, because when you play a scale, you will be far too much focused on the intonation. And intonation is something which can be adjusted. You can measure it, and you can tell me right away, my F is so and so much too flat, my C is so much too sharp, and I can adjust it. If you play the instrument and say, well, this one is 7% too bright, Where? The top? What? Well, we can't measure brightness or warmness of it. We can only say we like this sound or we don't. So the best thing, our advice is always, choose a tune you are very familiar with, which you really like, and where you have a clear idea how you would like to sound. And just play that tune. It shouldn't be too long. I have a couple of, orchestra excerpts, which I always prefer. Beethoven 4, Beethoven 6, Schubert 8. These are all fantastic solos, and they pretty much show whatever you need to know about an instrument. So there's no need that you play for hours on one instrument. You can really do it very, very quickly. And just play the first, play the second, and you will instinctively, right away know, oh, this one, I don't know why, but this one just is more appealing. And this one should compete to the next one, and to the next one, and to the next one. And you will end up with a group of instruments, and then we can have a closer look. Well, why did you come up with this kind of selection? And now we come to a very problematic point, because mostly when you try instruments, like they come from the factory, the instruments like they come are not in the condition like they should be. We tried it all probably many times, and you can go to quite a few stands here and you will notice, well, some instruments play quite nicely, others don't function. That has a lot to do with the way how they are produced. It has a lot to do with the financial pressure they are under. Does anyone has an idea how long it takes, for instance, to produce an R13? They have to make 800, pardon?
Say it again.
They have to make 840 operations, and they have 3 hours, 15 minutes. That's all. That's when the door opens, the material comes into the factory, all the different things what they have to do, all the operations, the final testing, writing the build, packing everything, 3 hours, 15 minutes. That's it. So, I mean, it's amazing what they produce, but it's not necessarily perfect. And one of the main problems what we have is always that the instruments don't seal properly. The reasons are partly because, well, when they work in wood, wood is, especially granite, is a very, very fine material, but it is a natural product, and it's not completely homogeneous. So it's very common that we have problems on tone holes, we have missing chips, things like that. The kind of pads which are used are primarily production friendly, not necessarily result friendly. And what we always do is, when we get these instruments, we have different kinds of pads, but we make sure that they all have exactly the same seal. And there's some other things we adjust so that when you try them, they all feel the same. So the only difference what you will have on our instruments is really the wood itself, the density of the wood, and you will still have differences in the sound because the bore will never be exactly the same. The reason is that when you produce the instrument, you have a so-called lathe, a machine, where you have a long drill with the form of the bore, and you have to press the instrument with your hands onto this drill. And we have on our web page also a video where you can see it, and it's quite interesting because you see how the man works on two instruments. And when you look closer in on this so-called reamer, on this drill, you will see a black dot, and that's where he should stop. On the first instrument, he goes a little bit too far, so the bore becomes slightly too wide. On the next one, he doesn't go all the way, so he's not right on target. I actually prefer it that way because that means that not all the instruments are exactly the same. So I have the chance to have maybe an instrument which is slightly darker, which is slightly wider, so that I really have still some possibilities. But the important thing is really when you try an instrument, it makes only sense if the instrument is really sealing properly. We are often asked who is picking our instruments. We did that many, many years ago. We did several tests with top professionals, and they tried instruments, came to Copenhagen with a big load what they picked in Paris, and then we got a shipment, and then we set up our instruments, and then afterwards they never kept the instrument they picked in Paris. And that's also the comment what we get again and again and again, really on a daily basis. It never played as good. Now, we are not the only ones who can make good work, but it really, I mean, shows a little bit, there's a huge, huge difference, and you're very welcome just to try it for yourself. When an instrument is feeling good, that it just plays much easier. There are a couple of other things we can do to improve instruments, and actually, these things, what we do on new instruments, they can be done on yours. In many cases, there's no need really to buy a new instrument. If you have an instrument where the bore became too wide, well, we have a technique to make the bore smaller again. So it doesn't matter how old an instrument is or how blown out, it can be redone. Another thing is if the plating is gone, that can be completely refurbished and it looks like a brand new instrument. If you have intonation problems, well, we just sit together and you play it, I listen, and then we can define, well, is it a sound question, is it an intonation question, and we can really tune the instrument the way you need it. So in many cases, we have situations where it finally ends up that the people don't really need a new instrument. Another very important thing which is forgotten, especially for students, because what we do quite a bit is that we travel through the US and other countries to universities and give different kind of lectures with different subjects. And well, the students, they pay a lot of tuition to become better players. And then when we look at the instruments, some of them are a complete disaster. And what most people are not aware of, the instrument you work with, well, one thing is you invested some money into it, but the much biggest part what you did, you invested a lot of time with it. Now, if you have an instrument which has some problems, that it's leaking, that the rings are too high, and many other things, they all will force you to do things which are unnecessary. For instance, like on most instruments, when you try them, you try to put the fingers very, very lightly on the instrument, and it should cover perfectly. If it doesn't, well, the first thing that you do is you press a little harder, because the finger has not to close or touch the ring, it has to close the tone hole. So if it doesn't do that, well, you have leaks and other problems. But you get just accustomed to press far too much. And you can't just press on one hand, you do it actually on both hands. But the energy what you need to press your fingers down is also the energy what you need to lift it up. And so it slows you down. You use unnecessary energy, both ways. And it makes it very difficult to really get a very even and light finger technique. And look at all the top players. It looks like it's just a play. It really is. It's absolutely no problem to play fast and precise. But what is important is really that it's very relaxed. Precision is another very important thing. If you have string tensions which are out of balance, very common thing is the B flat. Just take your clarinet and try to press or play a B flat very slowly. And in most cases, the register key will open first, and then actually the A key. That means that you actually play two notes instead of one. And that's just because the string tensions is not balanced properly. I mean, there are many other things which could be covered, but I think it's only 3 minutes left.
Yes.
So you're very welcome to come to the booth, and I think I have a lot of other topics to cover with it. But especially the time you can waste on instruments which are not properly set up is immense. And we have some plastic clarinets which have gotten exactly the same setup like the top professionals. And it makes more sense to learn or to play and practice on these instruments, because you know whatever you learn on that instrument, you learn for life. If you can afford something better, do it when there's money for it. But you don't waste your life in trying to learn something absolutely unnecessarily. One of the worst things we can really do is learn a lot of bad habits. And that's what most teachers fight with. also when they get the next student, that first you have to, well, eradicate all the bad habits people have developed, and often caused by instruments which are just not in the shape they should have been. Like I said, yeah. So I'm at the booth, so if there are more questions, you're very welcome. And otherwise, we have a webpage, clarinet.dk. There are literally hundreds of articles. There are very precise descriptions of the different models. I'm not finished with all the different manufacturers, but you will always find a description what the manufacturer says and our comments. They're sometimes different. So, all right. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome.